Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and this is the Keto Made Simple podcast. I'm hosting a free diabetes lab workshop on April 29. If you have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, this lab workshop will show you the key lab tests to assess your metabolic health. What you need to look at besides fasting glucose and hemoglobin A1C, what triglycerides are, and why they're essential to measure, how a low-carb diet can help to reverse type 2 diabetes. Register now to make sure you don't miss it. I've added the link in the description, or you can go to our website at adaptyourlifeacademy.com.
Hi, Dr. Eric Westman here, and welcome back. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jen Unwin. I've known Jen for several years and met her at international meetings, and I'm thrilled to have you on.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's lovely to be on. It's my favorite subject that we're going to talk about, so I'm sure it'll be fun.
Well, so assume the people you're talking to know about sugar and starch in general, and the people that we have taught know about keto diets and all that. But, you know, the saying is that it may be simple, but it's not always easy, right? So how did you get into this? You know, who are you? To someone who has no idea who you are, please start from scratch. Thank you.
Start from scratch. So, yes. So my name's Dr. Jen Unwin. I'm a clinical psychologist by background. So I trained to work in the National Health Service in the UK. And I specialize, I'm sort of saying specialized because I've actually don't work in the NHS anymore, but I specialized in helping people with all kinds of chronic health conditions to live the best life they could. So it was my job to help them to focus on their quality of life, their mental well-being, because we know that can help them to manage with chronic pain or disfigurement or life-threatening conditions. So that was my role, usually in a hospital setting, sometimes in a community setting.
So these are clinically ill people.
Yeah. So I wasn't your typical psychologist focusing in a mental health setting. Yeah, I worked in general hospitals and tertiary centres with, for example, burns patients, cancer patients who'd had amputations. That's what I did my doctorate in. And trying to help them sort of live the best they could. So I knew quite a lot about behavior change and hope and quality of life and all of those things. Alongside that, at the same time in my personal life, looking back now, I understand that I had a food addiction problem, really a carb addiction problem. And that had always been the case really since I was looking back through the eyes that I now have. I don't remember a time when I wasn't loving carbohydrate, refined foods, sweets, anything as a child that I could kind of get my hand on. And then obviously as a young person, so then that led me to be an overweight child, which was quite an unusual thing in the UK at that time. There weren't so many. I was the only kid in the class that was sort of overweight.
Yeah, well, same here. There was one or two. Yeah,
one or two. And then you kind of, okay, this isn't so great. And then I was in a girls' school, and it would be the same these days that girls get a little bit obsessed with dieting and body image and all of that. So I learned how to do all of that, and was rather a good dieter. I could, lose 4 stone. I did that when I was 16. I know you guys in America don't really think in stone, but 12 stone down to about 9 stone. So I was
how many pounds in a stone again?
14 pounds in a stone. So yeah.
Does that come from some king or a stone? Like the yard was a measurement of the arm?
Yeah. Who knows why it's called a stone?
14 pounds per stone, and you lost 4 stone.
Yeah, when I was 16. So
that's 50 pounds. Okay. Yeah.
Successful, but then of course the rub, which is that wasn't the answer, that I would sort of go on this diet, lose the weight. And then, of course, once you stop doing whatever the diet was, the weight would all come back on. And it was kind of, as a trained as a as a psychologist, it was kind of embarrassing not to be in control of what I was eating, or I didn't feel I was, unless I was on a very strict sort of regime. And that went on really until I was, I'd probably say, probably something like 15 years ago now, I read a book. Well, it was January. Picture the scene, a miserable January day, and I'm miserable because it's post-Christmas and I'd probably put on a stone or some amount, and I was kind of feeling, I'm just not in control of this behavior. What's going on? And there I'm wandering around the supermarket, and there's some cheap books, and one of these books was called Escape the Diet Trap. And I thought, there's a book that I need. And it actually turned out to be by a British GP.
John Briffa.
John Briffa.
Yeah.
That lucky me, that was kind of the day that everything changed. So I go home and I read this book, and it makes total sense to me. It's all about, as you say, carbohydrate is sugar. Sugar puts your insulin up. That's going to, you're going to be hungry. It's going to drive these cravings. Why don't you eat protein and fat and some vegetables kind of thing? So I'm a bit of having done many a diet, so it was kind of right, I'm diving straight into this. So I dove straight in and cut everything out, went sort of cold turkey. And I mean, you can only imagine how bad I felt for about 8 days because I was in
withdrawal,
major sugar withdrawals. But fortunately in the book he'd said, you're going to feel bad for about a week, and I did. But then the lights came on, and I actually couldn't believe how well I felt, and how energized and everything. So I'm telling David. So for those in the audience that don't know, my husband is Dr. David Unwin. He's a general practitioner here in the UK. And I'm saying to him, well, Dr. Briffa says that there's more sugar in cornflakes, than there is in sugar. And he's going, well, that can't be right. That makes no sense. But I'm sort of drip feeding him these bits and pieces, and he can see how well I'm feeling suddenly, how cheerful, how kind of energetic. So he gets a little bit interested.
Even in a dreary UK January.
Yes. I'm never usually cheerful in January in the UK. I did suffer from a bit of seasonal affective disorder, but
I didn't mean to make fun of that, but
it's true. But before low carb, but now I never get that now. So that's been another side benefit. So this goes on for a while, and David's kind of ignoring me because he's obviously seen it all before. He's seen me do the diet and then put the weight back on, do the diet. But then
let's just say I've never heard this detail of the story. I thought you were both kind of on board all at the same time. This is great.
Yeah. So he's kind of, oh no, another crazy scheme. But then I think he could see the logic of it. I could see the physiology was right, and what was happening, and I was losing weight, feeling more energetic, and it sort of coincided with a time when he'd got really disaffected with general practice. He thought people were just getting sicker and sicker, and there were more and more people with obesity, more and more people with diabetes, and it was coming to the end of his career, as he thought. And he was a bit sort of fed up with it.
Yeah.
So little did we know, but actually looking back, we think he was probably pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic. His blood pressure was going up. He was putting on a bit of weight. He was very, very sleepy in the afternoons. Liked a little nap in the afternoons. So looking back, that was going on. And I was sort of so energized by it. I said to him one day, we've never combined our sort of knowledge and skills into a project. And before you retire and I, finish with the NHS, how about we do a project that's kind of fun, and we're just doing it out of interest and putting our skills together, really. So what we did then was we started a group in his practice, which hardly any doctors in the GPs in the UK would run a group. They'd always sort of, see patients one-to-one. But because I was used to doing that at work, I said, well, you find the patients and we'll run this group. So we started with patients with pre-diabetes because we were a little bit nervous about doing something new. So we just wrote to all the patients with pre-diabetes in his practice and said, who wants to come along and maybe do this kind of lifestyle intervention for patients with pre-diabetes. And so that was about 13 years ago now, I think. And I don't know if people know, but, that's just been the most incredibly successful project. He's well known now all over the world. He goes, as you say, speaking on the international circuit about diabetes remission without drugs. And I think we're nearly up to 150 patients now in diabetes remission without drugs, and lots of others who've massively improved their condition, come off all kinds of medications. They just haven't necessarily got right over the line for the definition of remission, and he's probably got the best results.
And then you were able to assemble the money savings from the payer perspective viewpoint, right?
Exactly. Diabetes drugs alone, his practice saves, I think it's now £70,000 a year, compared to the sort of other practices in the area. But obviously, it's not just diabetes drugs that people come off. As you know, it's antihypertensives, it's antidepressants, there's all kinds of other drugs that get deprescribed. So the practice probably saves over £100,000 a year, on drugs.
A little detail. So the practice is a general practice. It's not obesity medicine specific, right?
Yep. It's just anybody and everybody in a geographical area gets a general practitioner in the UK, and you would go to them. They're your primary care physician. You'd go to them with any health concerns, and then they might refer you to the hospital. So probably there's been. So he told me the other day that he's not referred a single patient to the hospital for a foot ulcer or anything like that in the last 15 years.
I just had a former patient who relapsed, has all the resources in the world and the best medication care, just lost 2 toes to diabetes because everything was managed. But so that's fantastic. But just to put that in perspective, people are coming to him and to you in this group setting, and you're telling them to cut down the sugars and starches, and they're given a choice. So most doctors in my area never give a choice. They just give medicines and all that. What was the uptake or interest among these general patients?
Yeah, I mean, fantastic. It's been amazing. And since that project, it's grown really. The other doctors have sort of come on board. The practice nurses have come on board. I mean, it's taken years for it to sort of filter through. But now that the whole practice sort of practices in that way, and we'll say, perhaps if a blood test comes back and it's either borderline or just into the diabetic range, you say it's a choice. You could start lifelong medication today, or we could try a lifestyle approach. Are you interested? And again, he says, I think in the whole 15 years, he's had one person say that they weren't interested and they just wanted the drugs out of all the hundreds that he's seen. So,
there's a false perception or a perception that it's going to be hard, right? So what kind of approach do you use? Let's say someone came to the clinic, and I don't think you use a keto approach necessarily. I don't know for sure, but so what is the teaching that people get?
Yeah, I mean, some of them probably do end up keto, but it's more of a sort of go as low as you need to go to feel good and to get the results that you're looking for with usually with diabetes. But since then, I know he's expanded it to other things like heart failure or other conditions that we know, PCOS. That we know that low carbohydrate approaches can help with. So, yeah, he just has he has one simple sheet which he gives people. Then, he obviously talks it through. I'm not ever there for the one-to-ones. I just go down for the group. And in the group, we usually sort of have a bit of a topic. We might talk a bit about insulin or fats, or we cook food with people. We answer their questions. It's all very sort of, like you say, kind of, informal and chatty now. We did start off at the beginning with a bit of a curriculum, but now we just sort of do it based on who comes. And what's interesting is that
what people need to know, right?
What they want to know, what they need to know, because everybody starts from a different point. They don't understand it.
Excuse me, I use the metaphor of going to the car mechanic. There was a day when I kind of wanted to know the detail of, this was broken and the gasket and all, and now I'm like, just tell me you fixed it, and when do I bring it back?
Right.
Some people don't want to know the detail of the glucose and insulin, or they just want to, tell me what to do.
A sheet with the what can I eat on it, and then obviously people share local information, like where you can get cheap, I don't know, almond flour or something, whatever it is. Then, and interestingly, in terms of uptake of what you were saying and sort of engagement, so some of that original group from 15 years ago still come to our monthly group. They're still super engaged, and they also are so inspiring to the newcomers. And I'm sure you have that in your community where, there's one guy called Chris, and he's been written up, and David often features him in his talks. And he lost, a massive amount of weight, came off loads of medication. He still comes, and he still brings his photos, and he shows people his graphs and encourages them. And it's really nice to have those sort of expert patients people along. So
when did it occur? So a pilot program, what a great way to start and get experience. When did it occur to you that there was a subset or folks who had sugar addiction and their food?
Yeah, so alongside that, of course, there's me on my low-carb journey as well. And, getting a lot of the benefits, and all the benefits really, but then still having times when I would struggle just to make the right choices, even though I knew 100% that they were the right choices. And, some of the things that I were doing were definitely the wrong choices. So I still had my struggles. Like I say, it's simple, but even that simple advice isn't always easy to implement. So I knew there was kind of a little bit more to the story. And then I heard Bitten Jonsson, who's a Swedish nurse by background, and she'd done some videos for the Diet Doctor website about food addiction. I just happened to be on the Diet Doctor website, and I sort of said, "Oh, that's interesting. I'll click and watch that." And that was really the second sort of epiphany. Really, was that there is an addictive aspect to some people's relationship with food, including mine. And in a way that then explained all my previous struggles. And I mean, how stupid did I feel? I was a psychologist with a doctorate, and I worked with people with addiction, and I hadn't put two and two together that sugar, a carbohydrate, could be, could act in just the same way as other substances like nicotine, caffeine, and alcohol. And so since that day, and that's about 8 years ago now, so about halfway through the journey, I suddenly had that realization. So since then, that's what I've been focusing on in terms of, how do you help people with that problem? Because some people, and you'll see it in your clinic, some people, you give them that sheet and that information, they get it intellectually, off they go. You never need to see them again. They come back in a year's time, and they're still doing just as well as they ever did. Some people who kind of struggle a bit in the middle. And then there's this other group, which I think are the sort of hardcore food addicts that really struggle with cravings, with volume eating, with transferring that what had been a problem with carbohydrate and sugars to maybe sweeteners, maybe dairy, maybe nuts. They're the usual sort of suspects. and how do we help them to sort of understand that behavior and do something?
Stepping back a bigger view, what is the prevalence? How common is sugar addiction? And I know there are a lot of publications about this. So, and then people may not want to report or say it for embarrassment, but in your experience, how is this a common thing?
Yeah, pretty common. So there was a nice meta-analysis. I don't think it was last year. I think it was 2022, and they looked at all the studies using a thing called the Yale Food Addiction Scale.
Right.
It's a scale that they developed based on the DSM criteria for addiction to alcohol, drugs, etc. They just sort of reworded the criteria so they applied to food. So that's Ashley Gerhardt and colleagues. So they looked at all the papers. Now they found a prevalence of about 20%, but a lot of those papers were obviously clinical groups like patients with obesity, eating disorders, mental health problems, and so on. So in the clinic, it's going to be pretty common. It might be 20% or more. It's probably more.
It's more.
With type 2 diabetes and obesity, because those are the two likely outcomes of eating in that way. In the general population, studies tend to, let's say 10%-ish. But the scary thing is that in young people, it seems to be higher. And I suppose that is scary, but not surprising, because their food environment has been much worse than even ours was when we were growing up.
Yeah.
So young people, and certainly young people with obesity, there seem to be pretty high rates of this.
In fact, I think if someone has gone for weight loss surgery, they're basically, that's like they couldn't control this so far that they had to have someone operate on them for this.
It doesn't solve the addiction problem, and we know that one of the unfortunate side effects for some people of that surgery is that they actually develop an alcohol problem because they can't get the dopamine from food and sugars and ultra processed foods. They're kind of looking for other outlets, and that's a known thing that sometimes people develop alcohol problems post surgery. So it's amazing to me that people aren't screened on the whole. Most of these bariatric services won't be screening for food addiction. And that's why, it's because it's not an official disorder in the DSM or in the ICD, which we use in Europe. And that's a problem, because then there aren't services, there isn't research, and people aren't talking about it, recognizing it in clinic. And then people are getting the wrong advice and treatment. And going to be physically and mentally more sick than they need to be, but also will be, like any addiction, it's a kind of, for some people, it's a matter of sort of shame and embarrassment that can't control their own behavior. But if they can it really help me to understand it as an addiction problem, because then I can, there's something you can work with. People have been working with addiction for hundreds of years, because alcohol and other addictive substances have been around for hundreds of years. So we know a lot in addiction medicine about how to help.
The striking similarities between tobacco addiction and nicotine hit me. I spent 10 years helping to develop new treatments for smoking cessation. We would always add to the behavioral quit day or stop smoking cold turkey day some kind of medicine. I studied nicotine gum, nicotine patch, nicotine spray, nicotine inhaler, and I worked with the inventor of the nicotine patch who came up with the idea of Chantix, before it was Chantix. So now, looking back, my parents all smoked, and everyone smoked in the 60s and 70s in the U.S. And then the Surgeon General report came out, and a lot of people quit, but like 30, 40% still were all smoking. Can you imagine? And then if you grow up with it, my father was a doctor. Didn't occur to him that it was an addiction. Everyone smoked. So now I feel like it's kind of a similar process we're gonna have to go through with sugar.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a couple of points there. One is that, I mean, you probably know that when the writing was on the wall for the cigarette companies, they bought up all the food companies.
Yeah.
uh,
I mean, we shouldn't laugh. It's tragic. Yeah.
It is really sad. But then they brought their marketing, you know, and the food science side of it. You know, how can we make these foods irresistible, you know, in the shop, but also irresistible to our palates? They brought all that sort of approach to food manufacturing. So yeah, we were kind of a bit doomed there. But yeah, it's the same, and I think it will go the same way. I'd like to see in my lifetime a more more.
So
yeah.
Let me zoom back into the clinic. You're talking to somebody, and how does someone watching figure out if they have a sugar or starch addiction, and how do you figure that out?
Yeah, for ways really. So what's interesting is when we were recruiting for the study that we did, we've done a treatment intervention study, a bit like David and I did, but I've done it with some other people around food addiction. And we just asked on social media for people to apply who thought they were food addicts. And when we assessed them, well, what do you know? Yeah, they were all right. They knew. So one simple way is to say, and David does this in the clinic, you know, when they've perhaps struggled a couple of times, you know, he's given them the advice they need. They're perhaps diabetic, and he's given them the sheet, and then they're really struggling to follow it. You know, he'll say, you know, I wonder if, you know, do you feel like some of the, you know, a little bit addicted, or some of these foods are a little bit addictive for you? And, you know, then they'll say yes. And he says to me, you won't believe how many people literally cry when he says that, because nobody's said it before. And, you know, often it's bread. It's not actually sweet things, but it could be, it's often bread or cornflakes, these kinds of foods. So that's one way. The other way, you can use the Yale Food Addiction Scale. It's a little bit tricky to score in clinic. So, and it was developed as a research tool. So we've developed a simple screening tool called CRAVED, which is actually based on the ICD World Health Organization criteria for addiction, of which there's 6. So CRAVED, as you might imagine, stands for the 6 different symptoms, and it's reasonably easy to remember for a clinician, or they can have we've got a one sheet kind of tick box that they can use in clinic. And a few people like David Cavan, he's an endocrinologist here in the UK, he's been using that in the clinic to see how it works. It seems to work quite well. So the 6 criteria: C for cravings and compulsions, which are, you know, obvious that people get these sort of urges that they can't resist to eat certain foods that they don't want to be eating. R stands for reaching for more, and that's the idea of tolerance that everybody understands from alcohol. You know, that the more you drink, the more you need to drink to get the same effect. So that's exactly this. You get exactly the same with food. You know, maybe a couple of biscuits would have done the job at one time, but now it's the whole packet. A is activities neglected, and this picks up on the idea that in addiction, what happens is that you get more and more focused on the substance, and it sort of blurs out other things in life, things like, you know, hobbies and work and activities. It's the thoughts and compulsions are so much about the substance that other things sort of go by the wayside. V is for volume, and that's the idea of losing control of the amount that you eat, or you know, intending to have the 2 biscuits and never being able to stick to that. And that's a common one for us addicts. We say, well, it's fine. You know, I've not had any for a while. I'll just have a little bit and it'll be fine. It's never fine. It always becomes a binge. E is for exclusion, and that's the idea of withdrawal symptoms. So when you try and cut out sugar and carbohydrates, processed foods, do you get withdrawal symptoms? And that can be things, it could be mood changes, could be shakiness, dizziness, gastrointestinal problems, sleeplessness, headaches, all the things that people typically report when they, as I did, try and go sugar-free in one fell swoop.
That's right. And very, very practical and memorable. And, but it for an individual going through it sometimes is hard to see. I had someone who came in all earnestness back in the smoking cessation days. He came in and said, Doc, I know how to fix my craving for cigarettes. I said, well, wow, this could be a new treatment. And I started to write it down. And he said, when I smoke, my cravings go away. And to me, as a practitioner, it's like, well, duh. But people come in thinking, well, but I crave it, I need it. What's remarkable about a kind of cold turkey sugar and starch withdrawal or abstinence is that for most people, the cravings don't go on very long. Like, has there ever been a comparison of different withdrawal syndromes? It seems to me the carbohydrate one for most people is relatively short.
Yeah, I think the actual sort of physical withdrawal is about a week, isn't it? Something like that. But then there can be these kind of intense cued cravings. And that's the problem with food, of course, is that, we have to eat. And unfortunately, our food environment is so crazy that, you go to the petrol what would you call it? A gas station, you go to it, and you're just confronted with all those drug foods. Fast food places, it's just everywhere, and advertising, it's on the television. And, I think if you've got a drug or alcohol problem, I'm not saying it's easy, but you can stay out of the bar. You can,
at least for a while, right?
While not have booze in the house. We have to have food in the house. It's like, what food is safe for us? And that's always very individual. I mean, there's some really obvious culprits that people always need to cut out: the sugar, the refined carbohydrates, the ultra processed foods. They need to go, the grains and so on. But then there's all these grey areas around dairy and nuts, and alcohol is another example. Should people with a food addiction drink alcohol? So it kind of gets complicated, and it's in social situations, that's the thing that certainly in early days that people really struggle with. People know that they love cake or have loved cake, so they're offering them cake, they bring them presents that are foods that they don't want to be eating anymore. They have to have all those conversations. And I think if someone's giving up alcohol or drugs, all their friends and family go, yay, good for you. And when we give up cake and fries, some people say, yay, good for you. And then some of our family members and friends feel threatened by that or don't agree with that, and will be trying to push back against it. And all of those social situations can be a challenge for people.
So any practical pointers for the person who goes to the holiday gathering and, if you don't eat grandma's pie or cake,
right,
their perception is that they don't love you. And I mean, how does that get mixed up, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's sort of it's a complicated thing. I mean, I usually say to people, if it's a gathering and a sort of buffet situation, nobody minds if you take something as an offering to a buffet or a gathering. So just take something that you would be okay to eat, because then you've not got to panic, because some buffets that you go to, there's literally nothing for a food addict or a low-carb keto person to safely eat. So, take some cold meats or some deviled eggs or whatever it is that, you can offer to the party, so that you're not anxious about there's no food for me. There's something there that you can eat, and there's usually a salad, isn't there, or something that you can eat. I think if people are close, I had to do this with David's mom, an amazing cook and lovely, lovely person, and always loved to cook everybody their favourite thing when they would come round. And she took a long while to sort of understand because she's in no way does she have this problem? She's one of these people at the other end of the spectrum that she has chocolate in her cupboard from the 1970s that she's not, she's not eaten. It just doesn't bother her at all to be in the presence of these things. She can have a tiny bit. So we just had to sit down and have an honest discussion that, that for me, that wasn't possible just to have a small piece or one bite, that always led to wanting more and having to eat more. And that for me, abstinence was so much the easier thing to maintain. And use that example, I'd say just like we understand a person with an alcohol problem, we wouldn't say, have a little whiskey because it's Friday night. And I think people really understand that. So I think if you can compare it to that and you just say, well, that's how I am, that's just how I am with food. I don't know why it is, but it just is.
Yeah. How do you handle the grandkids, kids, parenting, grandparenting? I have lots of comments and questions about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're so lucky. So when we started it, our youngest child was still at home, teenage, and I would sort of leave him if he wanted a bag of microwave rice with his dinner, then he could do it. That was up to him. We didn't force it on him, but eventually he and we've got 3 children, the older 2, all came along. They just over time realized that if I cooked them a meal, they enjoyed it. They felt better afterwards. That they didn't feel so great when they ate a lot of wheat and these other things, cakes and things. So over the years, the family at large has sort of adopted our way of eating. And so we've got the 4 grandchildren here today from our eldest daughter, and they've been brought up pretty much as kind of low carb kids. I mean, they have the odd, that real food, they do have the odd, we call it a jacket potato, baked potato, but on the whole, they eat meat and vegetables and cheese sauce and cream and berries and yogurt and stuff like that, and they're fine with it because that's all they've known. So
what is it in human nature that a lot of people go from one extreme to the other? Like, so I'll have people who, those grandchildren, they can't have anything. And yet we grew up having mounds of candies and we survived. It's not like it's an immediate poison, but often then there's this reaction to go to the other extreme and be almost neurotic or obsessive about it. What is that?
Yeah, what is that? We're human beings they do like black and white, don't they? I think that the danger of that is that, and we hear this sometimes from people that when I do assessments with people with food addiction, they'll say, when I lived at home, my parents were so strict, they were really super healthy parents and everything was locked away or you couldn't have it. And then, of course, what happens was when they left home and they had their own money, if they had a little bit of a tendency to like the sweet foods, they just went crazy. And you can see that that's when the symptoms started. They would be sort of 17 or 18 when they'd left home. And that's when it all went. So I think it's important to explain to children why you're limiting the sugary food and not, everyone has to find their own way, but in our house, it isn't a total ban. So if they go to a party at a kid's house or something, they might eat some food at that house that they wouldn't normally have. And that's okay. And then you actually, interestingly, usually they feel a little bit unwell. So you're able to say, oh, that food didn't do you any good, did it? So yeah, but it is a very delicate line to walk for parents and grandparents, I think, of where right lies in how much you allow or don't allow. And I think it could be over permissive. And obviously we don't want kids just growing up eating a pure junk food diet. But as you say, there are also some risks to being super the other way. I think they have to work it out for themselves that they actually feel. And I think that's what happened with our kids. They actually worked out that they actually felt better. Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about your book, Fork in the Road, and I assume a lot of this wisdom and the advice is in this book.
Yeah, it's all in the book. It was my lockdown baby, so I'd not long left the NHS and was starting to think a lot about this. Yes, I wrote a little book, Fork in the Road, and all the profits go towards furthering this whole field of work. So trying to get food addiction recognised as a condition. So myself and a colleague, Heidi Yever, who's a nutritionist, are trying to coordinate a resubmission to the WHO. We've already made one submission that was rejected, but we're going to resubmit. And also, obviously, in the US, you've got Ashley Gerhardt and colleagues, and they're going to make a submission to the APA, so that the DSM include food addiction as a ultra-processed food addiction. I think they're going for. So the profits from the book go to supporting research and the work we need to do to try and get this condition recognized.
Yeah, if any of this, if you're watching and any of this seems interesting, I highly recommend this book. It's very practical and actually, when I hear you and David speak at meetings, it's just so down to earth and clinic based, that it is so important, I think, as people consume information off the internet, that you want information to come from people who have been in the clinic, if at all possible. If you're asking for clinical advice, right? You don't ask the bodybuilder in the gym how to reverse diabetes, so that's fantastic. Now, have you received any negative, like any pushback from having this sugar addiction concept, and which I believe in, of course, but
yeah, I mean, just the odd tiny bit on Twitter, as we used to know it, on X. Occasionally there's there are people on there who are kind of anti that message, but on the whole, a great deal of support. When you tell people about it, they just say, "Oh yeah, that's me," or "I know somebody," or So as you say, the book's supposed to be. It's really simple and practical. Read it yourself, and then, I often recommend that if you've got a relative who doesn't understand it, they can have a read as well, because it's only a small book. It's not a great big scientific tome. It's just the basics of the. Yeah.
It's not off-putting like some of these other tomes. We've come a long way because. A long time ago, doctors would get in trouble for talking about food or sugar or telling the baby or the mother that you could actually eat real food when you were weaning a baby. That was Prof. Noakes, of course. So I think in general, there's acceptance of this now, and just want to make sure. Can you hear that? I'm afraid the noise is picking up here.
I can't hear it at this end, but.
Okay, well, I'm going to just keep going through then. So back to the more of the interview. Don't you feel like there's more acceptance now than there was some years ago?
I mean, we've really noticed a big change. So the first few conferences that David spoke at, he actually got booed, and people wouldn't talk to him. Some of the dietitians said he was harming people, and it was all. He got quite a lot of negativity, but that's a long time ago now. I really feel the tide's turning. Like, we've got the Australian Diabetes Association have just accepted, haven't they, that low carbs are an acceptable treatment. And there was a paper here in the UK that David was on with the British Dietetics Association as well, saying that low carb is it's a fine thing to recommend to people with type 2 diabetes. So things have really come a long way, I think.
On the sugar and ultra processed food addiction front, tell me a little bit about this meeting coming up.
Yeah, so we're really excited about this. So one of the things that the WHO said to us when they rejected our first application to have food addiction recognized was that there was no consensus around the topic, and they were right, really. That it wasn't a field that was sort of being coherently brought together. So over the last year, we've been in small groups, talking to researchers, clinicians, and anyone who we can find who has some expertise in this field. And we're pulling together a consensus document, which is all the statements that all those people who took part feel they can agree. And quite a few of them are coming to speak. So it's in London on May the 17th that we're going to launch this consensus. And it's going to be a celebration of that work, but also the beginning of our next steps of submitting that to the WHO. So we've got people like Robert Lustig, Vera Tarman, who I know has spoken to your community. We've got David Wiss and Timothy Bruton, who will be talking about the interrelationship between food addiction and eating disorders, which is a topic of a lot of interest in the clinical world. We've got, who else have we got? Susan Pierce-Thompson from Bright Line Eating. We've got Nicola Wiener, who's very well known in the sort of neuroscience side of Is Sugar Addictive?
Yes, she's done animal studies with
a lot of animal studies with sugar and the brain.
Unfortunately, I can't make the meeting, but I'm on the consensus panel and will and wholeheartedly a part of this from the aspect of when you take away sugar and ultra processed food using a keto diet, those symptoms will go away. You won't crave those things anymore. In fact, I will often use the sort of it's sort of humorous, sort of not out. Someone will say, "Well, you have to have fruit, don't you?" And I'll say, "Well, no. Ask me if I crave fruit," and people will go, "Well, what do you know? What do you mean?" And say, "No," I say, "Ask me if I crave fruit," and then they'll get around to, "Do you crave fruit?" And I'll say, "No, I don't eat fruit." So do you crave cigarettes? Yeah, no, of course not. So it's hard to wrap your head around the food. Well, and so people say, "Well, you have to eat." What's your response to that?
Yeah, we do. Just eat real food.
Yeah, you don't have to eat junk.
Don't eat junk. Eat as nature intended. Meat, fish, eggs, low carb vegetables. Yeah, that's
well, I feel like I could talk for hours, and I have to wrap up. The fascinating thing is you both are so energetic and have time to not only help people in the clinic, and actually I hope to talk to David at some point where you said he was going to retire, and now of course he's not retired at all.
No intentions of retiring.
I hope you don't either. So, but to have the clinic and then expand it to national and international scope is just really hard and difficult, a lot of time. And thank you so much for what you're doing.
A pleasure. Thank you.
And let's talk again soon. I hope to see you at a meeting soon as well.
Yeah, and do join online, everybody. You don't have to be in London. You can get a live stream ticket and join us online.
Mention the conference again, please.
Yeah, so May the 17th in London. If you look on Eventbrite at International Food Addiction Consensus Conference 2024, you can get a live stream ticket if you're over there in the States. We'd love to have you join us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that'll be the end. And wow, thanks. Hope things are going well for you and the family and
you and yes.
I'm looking forward to going back to actually an obesity medicine conference where all they're going to do is talk about Ozempic and pills and shots, and it's really kind of taking the U.S. by storm, for better or worse.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it, that it seems like actually one of the ways it works is through the addiction pathways, because it helps with alcohol as well, doesn't it, I believe?
Yeah, well, what do you want to do after a big holiday meal? Nothing. So actually it brings in anhedonia, and it in some people, it's going to be depression, suicide, I'm afraid. So,
Yeah.
and then those days.
Muscle problems as well, is it? That you lose muscle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so then in Mounjaro and Zepbound, these are the combined GIP, GLP-1s. They work about 30% even more than the semaglutide or liraglutide, the Ozempic ones. So the medicines come out are harsh. I mean, but to overcome sugar addiction, people had to go for surgery, right? And so I say for better or for worse, of course, it's the business model to just have people on the drugs forever.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's anyway, Oprah's into it now, selling, pushing
she's been a food addict all along. She needs.
So did you ever meet Jackie Eberstein? Jackie's the nurse that works with Dr. Atkins.
Oh, right. No, yeah.
I got to know her really well. I talked to her recently. She said, oh, yeah, Dr. Atkins was on the Oprah show back in the 80s.
Wow.
They told him, don't do it. Don't do it. They're going to do a hatchet job. And they sure did. So Oprah brought on someone who just kind of hit Dr. Atkins. You can't do that. You're killing people. And Dr. Atkins, didn't know how to respond tactfully. They often made him just look like a fool. But what they said back then is that Oprah was the biggest sugar.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And check out Adaptive Life Academy.com.
Our weight goes up and down, all this Weight Watch stuff. And I mean, you could just see it. Yeah.
But so the big picture view is Oprah never learned to cut out the carbs.
Nope.
And so you don't need the drugs. But anyway.
He's booked in, definitely.
Great. Yeah. Thanks again. I'll let you go.
I'll see you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.